Later that night, after the last receipt had printed and the final mop water had gone cold, Casey was called into the manager's office. The fluorescent hallway leading there seemed longer than usual, stretching like a tunnel into uncertainty. Her sneakers squeaked slightly on the polished floor as she walked, the sound almost painfully loud against the hush of the closed market. Inside, the office smelled of stale coffee and wet wool, a small heater rattling by the desk. Mrs. Birch sat with a tight expression behind a cluttered desk, flipping open a thin manila folder. The overhead light caught the silver threads in her tightly pinned hair, making her look harsher than usual. Casey stood quietly, waiting. Her gloved hands clutched the frayed strap of her canvas backpack, still slung over one shoulder. It had carried the same battered thermos for years, a little anchor from quieter times. Mrs. Birch cleared her throat. Inside the folder was a single document, printed and prepared with the efficiency of someone who had issued many warnings before. Corporate Policy, Section 4.2, Unauthorized Distribution of Store Property. Section 5.1, Breach of Conduct Standards Concerning Non-Paying Individuals on Premises. The words blurred slightly as Casey stared at them, a slow, sinking weight pressing into her chest. It was a language she knew too well, the cold vocabulary of rules, recited without heart, used to erase small, inconvenient acts of humanity. "You understand why you're being reprimanded?" Mrs. Birch asked, her voice clipped, almost impatient. Casey nodded once. She didn't trust herself to speak. Her throat felt tight, as if wrapped in wire. "You put the store at risk," the manager continued. "Liability issues. Theft encouragement. Corporate exposure." The phrases tumbled out like pebbles down a cliff, small, sharp, meaningless against the vastness of what Casey had seen, a boy shivering outside, his hunger plain on his thin, dirt-smudged face. She had not thought about corporate exposure then. She had thought about soup, about warmth, about surviving one more cold night. Silently, Casey reached for the pen offered to her and signed her name at the bottom of the reprimand. Her handwriting was careful and small, just like the life she lived, one foot in front of the other, always careful, always trying to stay unseen. As she slid the paper back across the desk, Mrs. Birch gave a brisk nod and closed the folder with a decisive snap. "You may go," she said, already turning to her computer. Casey walked back through the empty store, her footsteps echoing off the bare linoleum. The market felt different now, the shelves loomed higher, the aisles stretched longer, the fluorescent lights buzzed colder. At the time clock, she punched out, the machine stamping a finality onto her day with a loud mechanical clatter. Her jacket smelled faintly of bleach from her morning shift at the school, and she zipped it up to her chin, the broken tab of the zipper scraping against her scarf. Outside, snow had started falling in earnest, the flakes thick and heavy, sticking to the sidewalk like small, hesitant footprints. The reprimand paper crinkled inside her backpack, a dry, accusing whisper against the fabric. She almost pulled it out to throw it away, but something stopped her. Some small stubbornness, a seed of defiance deep inside her, insisted she keep it. Not as a wound, but as a marker, a reminder that kindness, even punished, was never wasted. The walk home was slow. The snow muffled everything, the passing cars, the distant bark of a dog, even the creak of the old iron gate leading to her grandfather's house. The familiar sights along Main Street blurred under the white dusting, becoming dreamlike and strange. Through the frosted windows of the houses she passed, she caught glimpses of warm light, Christmas trees, people gathered around dinner tables. 1,000 tiny lives, closed and complete, unaware of the small grief walking past outside. Casey's boots were soaked by the time she reached the porch. She paused before opening the door, brushing snow from her hair and shoulders. Her fingers, numb and red, fumbled with the key. Inside, the house was dark except for a small lamp left on in the living room. The familiar smell of wood smoke and old paper filled her nose, comforting and heavy. Her grandfather was asleep in his armchair, a worn quilt pulled up to his chest, the muted hum of the television casting flickering shadows across his withered face. Her younger brother's schoolbooks were spread across the kitchen table, a cold mug of cocoa abandoned beside them. Casey moved quietly, setting her backpack down with a soft thud. She pulled the reprimand paper from it, smoothing it against the kitchen counter. She stared at it for a long moment. The words were so neat, so official. They had no place in this house, among chipped mugs and hand-sewn curtains and the quiet resilience that lived in the walls. She folded the paper once, then again, making it small enough to tuck into the back of a drawer. Not hidden, but not displayed either. Just a part of the life she chose to live, imperfect, unseen, but steadfast. In the kitchen, she reheated a small pot of soup, stirring it slowly as the clock ticked toward midnight. The metal spoon clinked against the pot, a steady, soft rhythm in the silent house. As she sipped from her chipped white mug, her thoughts wandered back to the boy. She wondered if he had found someplace warm for the night. If the soup had been enough to give him the strength to face another morning. The thermos, still half full from her own long day, sat on the counter beside her. She turned it slowly in her hands, the chipped paint catching the light. It had been her mother's, once. A small thing. A reminder that sometimes, carrying warmth was all you could do. Casey finished her soup, rinsed the mug, and turned off the kitchen light. The snow fell harder now, blanketing the world in stillness. Upstairs, in the small room she shared with her brother, Casey tucked herself under the worn quilt, her body aching with the tiredness that only quiet people carry, those who bear the weight of goodness in a world that often punishes it. She fell asleep with her hand curled loosely around the thermos, her last thought simple and stubborn: kindness, even when unseen, even when punished, was never wrong. Never. At just past 9 o'clock that night, when the house had settled into its nightly hush and the world outside was a swirling blur of falling snow, a knock sounded at the front door. It wasn't loud, just 3 firm raps against the wood, but it sliced through the quiet like a stone into still water. Casey stirred from the worn couch where she had been curled under a blanket, half reading a dog-eared book by the dim lamplight. She set the book aside carefully, the cracked spine falling closed with a soft sigh. Her brother, already asleep upstairs, didn't stir. Her grandfather didn't either, the gentle rhythm of his breathing unchanged from his chair by the fire. She pulled her sweater tighter around herself and crossed the living room in socked feet. The draft from the door seeped in at the seams, carrying the bitter chill of the night. For a long moment, she hesitated. Visitors after dark were rare in Edgewood, especially when the snow piled high enough to muffle even the bravest footsteps. For a fleeting second, she wondered if it might be Mrs. Ellis from next door needing help with her furnace again, or Mr. Bryant searching for his runaway beagle. When she opened the door, the cold hit her first, sharp and immediate, a slap of winter air. Then she saw them. 3 men stood on the porch, their silhouettes backlit by the weak glow of the street lamp. Snowflakes clung to their shoulders and hats. They wore thick coats, but the insignia stitched across their chests was unmistakable even in the dark: National Guard. Their boots left heavy prints on the porch, and despite the cold, their postures were straight, solemn, disciplined. The man in the center stepped forward slightly. His uniform bore more stripes than the others, and his face was deeply lined, his jaw firm under a close-cropped beard now dusted with snow. He removed his glove before speaking. "Are you Casey Morgan?" he asked, voice low but clear. Casey nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. The man's expression softened, though a weight seemed to anchor him where he stood. "I'm Sergeant Lawson," he said. "We're with the Vermont National Guard." He gestured behind him to the 2 younger men, who shifted respectfully but remained silent. Casey gripped the edge of the door, steadying herself against the storm she sensed was just behind his words. "We're here because of something you did tonight," Lawson continued. "Something important." From the folds of his coat, he drew out a small envelope, plain, unassuming, but heavy with significance. Along with it, something metallic glinted in his hand, a coin the size of a silver dollar, stamped with the crest of the guard. Casey blinked, confused. Lawson must have seen the question in her eyes. "The boy you helped tonight," he said, his voice thickening just slightly. "His name is Lucas Murphy. He's 10 years old. His mother passed away a few months back. His father, Colonel Arthur Murphy, is stationed 2 towns over." The words fell into place slowly, like snow settling on frozen ground. Lucas had been placed with temporary guardians, Lawson went on, choosing his words carefully, but things weren't good there. He ran away. He's been missing for days. Casey's heart squeezed painfully. The boy's thin frame, his torn jacket, his hollow stare, all made sharper, more urgent in hindsight. If it weren't for the meal you gave him, he might not have made it through the night, Lawson said. He told the officers at the precinct that after you helped him, he felt brave enough to walk to the police station. The other two guardsmen shifted again, as if restraining the impulse to say more, to let some deeper emotion spill out. Lawson extended the envelope toward her. The colonel wanted you to have this, he said. A personal letter of gratitude. And this. He placed the coin carefully into Casey's palm, his hand briefly covering hers with the weight of the gesture. It was heavy. Cool to the touch. Around the edge, in careful relief, were the words, service above self. For a moment, Casey could do nothing but stare at it, the simple object suddenly heavier than anything she had carried all day. Lawson stepped back, the porch groaning under their combined weight. I know you didn't do it for thanks, he said. People like you never do. The falling snow softened the edges of the world around them, as if holding this moment in a glass globe, untouchable. We just wanted you to know, he finished, his voice rough, that it mattered. For a few heartbeats, no one moved. No one spoke. The snow fell harder now, gathering on the men's hats and shoulders, clinging to the faded welcome mat at Casey's feet. Then, without further ceremony, the three men saluted her. It wasn't a grand, sweeping gesture. It was simple. Honest. Deeply solemn. Casey, her throat tightening, managed a small nod, her hand closing around the coin like it was a living thing. The soldiers turned and walked back through the snow, their boots crunching softly in the thickening drifts. At the curb, a dark military SUV idled, exhaust curling into the night sky. Casey watched until the red taillights disappeared into the white. When she closed the door and leaned against it, the house seemed to breathe around her, an old, warm exhale, as if the walls themselves recognized what had just passed through. She stood there for a long time, the letter still unopened in her hand. In the kitchen, the thermos gleamed faintly under the lamplight, its dented surface catching the glow. Casey touched it lightly, a small smile breaking through the exhaustion etched into her features. The night had changed, not just for Lucas Murphy, but for her too. In a world often quick to punish kindness, someone had seen it. Had honored it. The Ripper Man still sat folded in the drawer. But tonight, she held something far heavier. Far more real. The coin's edge pressed against her palm as she whispered into the quiet house, a vow only she needed to hear. Kindness was never wasted. Never forgotten. Not ever. The morning after the soldiers came, the snow still blanketed Edgewood like a thick quilt, softening every sound, muting every ordinary noise. The town woke slowly, headlights carving cautious paths through white-covered streets, bundled figures hurrying between doorways. Casey stood at the kitchen window, a mug of lukewarm tea cupped between her hands, watching as the first light turned the snow into a soft, blinding brightness. The coin rested on the windowsill beside her, catching the pale dawn in its worn edges. She hadn't moved it since placing it there the night before. It felt like it belonged there now, a small, silent witness to what had shifted inside her life. When she left for work, the thermos was tucked securely in her backpack, as always, its comforting weight against her spine. Her boots crunched heavily through the packed snow on the sidewalks. Green Pines Market loomed ahead, its rooftop sagging slightly under the heavy drifts, its fluorescent lights buzzing faintly even from the parking lot. Inside, something was different. The usual morning clatter of carts and clinking change was replaced with an odd, hushed energy, as if the building itself had paused to listen. Shoppers gathered in loose clusters near the front windows, whispering behind gloved hands. Mrs. Birch stood stiffly near the customer service counter, her clipboard forgotten, her gaze shifting nervously between the entrance and the break room door. Casey slipped past them quietly, hanging her coat on the bent hook by the lockers. Her name tag felt heavier than usual as she pinned it to her chest. It didn't take long for her to realize why the atmosphere had changed. On the community bulletin board near the exit, where lost dogs, babysitting services, and bake sale flyers normally fluttered, someone had taped a copy of the morning paper. The headline blazed in bold print: "Local cashier's kindness rescues missing child." Below it, a grainy photo showed a young boy wrapped in a thick blanket, clutching a styrofoam cup of soup. In the article, tucked between official statements from the police and a few scattered quotes from Sergeant Lawson, was her name: Casey Morgan. A line that made her breath catch. A simple act of kindness restored hope where it had nearly been lost. She stared at it, unmoving, as customers pointed, whispered, nodded in her direction. Some smiled. Some looked sheepish. A few, recognizing her, even stepped closer, but hesitated, as if unsure whether to intrude. By mid-morning, the local radio station had picked up the story, reading snippets of the article between songs. By noon, a reporter from the Edgewood Gazette arrived, camera slung over his shoulder, hoping for a comment. Mrs. Birch tried to intervene, flustered and red-faced, but it was clear, the story had already left their hands. Green Pines Market's corporate office responded almost immediately. A statement, printed and taped to the front door by noon, announced a reversal of Casey's reprimand and issued a formal apology for the mishandling of a team member's humanitarian efforts. The notice fluttered slightly every time the door opened, a constant reminder to every shopper that something had shifted inside these walls. But it wasn't just apologies that poured in. An idea, born somewhere between the corporate fear of bad press and the townspeople's groundswell of admiration, sprouted almost overnight. By the following week, a new program launched, Meals for Hope, inviting customers to donate $1 at checkout toward providing free hot meals for local children in need. A large poster near the registers showed a simple image, a hand offering a bowl of soup to a small pair of outstretched hands. Casey's photograph was not on the poster, she had gently refused, but everyone knew the heart behind it. Volunteers pinned red mittens to the community board, one for every meal donated. Within days, the wall bloomed like a garden of warmth, a sea of soft crimson promises against the cold. Strangers began to approach Casey in the aisles. A woman she didn't recognize slipped a folded note into her hand as she bagged groceries, a simple thank you and a story about a son lost to the streets years ago. An elderly man buying canned goods gruffly pressed $1 into her palm, insisting it was for the next hungry kid. Small gestures. Quiet acknowledgments. Pieces of the town leaning toward kindness, stitched together by the simplest of actions. And everywhere Casey turned, she caught glimpses of it. Children smiling behind heavy scarves, fathers lingering a little longer by the soup aisle, mothers wiping their eyes discreetly near the checkout. Mrs. Birch, once so rigid, now avoided meeting Casey's gaze directly. But she spoke softer. Handed out extra break time without mentioning it. Even replaced the old, cracked thermos Casey had used for years with a new one, leaving it anonymously on the break room table with a note. For carrying more than coffee. Thank you. Casey smiled when she saw it but still kept the old thermos in her backpack, tucked beside the coin. Symbols mattered. Anchors mattered. The days blurred into each other, full of simple tasks, scanning barcodes, stacking canned corn, folding brown paper bags, but threaded through everything now was a different rhythm, a quiet hum of change. The town, once gray and hunched under the weight of its own smallness, seemed to stand a little taller. Not because of a grand speech or a dramatic rescue, but because a tired young woman had handed a boy a bowl of soup on a cold December night without expecting anything in return. Because kindness, once loosed into the world, had proven impossible to pull back. It grew. It breathed. It warmed. It changed. Weeks passed, and the snowbanks along Edgewood streets turned gray and hardened with the bitter crust of late winter. Christmas decorations sagged in windows, their once bright colors dimmed by the endless cold. Life at Green Pines Market settled into a new rhythm, slower but somehow lighter, as if invisible hands had lifted a heavy curtain no one realized they'd been living behind. Casey continued her routine, early mornings cleaning the empty halls of Edgewood Elementary, evenings behind the cash register, carrying her thermos, her quiet patience, and the coin that rarely left the inside pocket of her coat. Then, one morning in late January, a letter arrived. It came in a thick cream envelope, the town seal embossed on the back. Casey opened it carefully with trembling fingers at the kitchen table while her brother packed his school bag nearby. Inside was a simple message, an invitation to the Edgewood Civic Hall for a community recognition ceremony. No details. Just a date, a time, and a request that she please attend. She almost didn't go. The thought of standing in front of a crowd made her stomach twist into anxious knots. But her grandfather pressed the letter into her hand that morning, his voice steady in the still kitchen. Some honors aren't for us to refuse. When Casey arrived at the hall, the parking lot was full. Snow crunched beneath her worn boots as she hesitated at the door. Through the frosted glass, she saw families gathered in clusters, children weaving between adults, the mayor in his heavy overcoat standing by the podium at the front. Inside, the warmth hit her immediately, not just from the old radiator humming against the far wall, but from the way faces turned toward her as she entered. Recognition. Gratitude. Casey moved quietly to a seat in the second row, feeling exposed and small beneath the high ceilings and yellowed banners. The thermos was tucked deep into her bag, the coin pressing reassuringly against her side. The ceremony began with the usual announcements: awards for the high school's debate team, thanks to the snowplow crews, an acknowledgement of the town's efforts during the rough winter. Then the mayor stepped to the microphone. There are moments, he began, his voice filling the room, when a community is reminded of who it is. Not by grand gestures, not by wealth or fame, but by small acts of decency that ripple outward. He looked directly at Casey then, and her breath caught. We are here today, he continued, because one person, quietly and without expectation, chose kindness over convenience, compassion over rules. Murmurs of agreement stirred through the hall. The mayor gestured toward the side doors. From behind them, Lucas Murphy entered, his small figure almost swallowed by the oversized jacket he wore, his boots scuffing the wooden floor. Casey's heart lurched. He moved quickly, nervously, across the stage and threw his arms around her with a force that made the hall gasp, a boy clinging not to a stranger, but to a lifeline. Casey knelt instinctively, arms wrapping around him, her own tears stinging behind her eyes. The mayor's voice broke slightly as he said, "Today, we honor Casey Morgan with the Citizen of Quiet Courage Award for reminding us that humanity's truest strength lies in unseen goodness." Applause filled the hall, not the polite kind, but something deeper, something almost feral in its sincerity. As Casey stood, Lucas still at her side, the mayor handed her a framed certificate and a small, shining plaque that caught the light like a promise. The plaque simply read, "Kindness without condition. Courage without recognition." Casey looked out over the faces, Mrs. Birch among them, her eyes lowered, familiar customers from the market, neighbors who had once walked past her without noticing. Now, every eye was on her, and not one looked away. Silence fell, thicker than applause, the kind of silence that says more than noise ever could. A silence where change happens. Lucas's small hand gripped hers tightly as they left the stage together. After the ceremony, people came in small groups, to shake her hand, to hug her, to press folded notes of thanks into her palm. It blurred together, kindness layered upon kindness, the way snowflakes fall and become something vast. When she returned to Green Pines Market the next day, something new hung above the entrance, a small brass plaque, carefully polished. Kindness is not a violation. It is what makes us human. Employees stopped to touch it as they entered, almost unconsciously, as if it had always been there. The reprimand she had once tucked away in a drawer was quietly removed from her file. In its place, a copy of the newspaper article, framed and hung above the employee time clock. New hires were told the story during orientation, not as a caution, but as a calling. Green Pines Market changed because Casey did not. Edgewood changed because Casey did not. One quiet woman, one small bowl of soup, one brave, shivering boy, and a ripple that touched an entire town. Casey never thought of herself as extraordinary. She still walked to work with her backpack slung over one shoulder, thermos rattling inside. Still packed her brother's lunch. Still paid the bills late some months. But now, when she sipped her tea by the kitchen window at dawn, she saw something different in the way the town's lights blinked against the endless snow. Hope. Real, stubborn hope. The coin from Colonel Murphy sat on the windowsill beside her mug. The plaque hung over the market door. And Lucas Murphy's laughter sometimes echoed through the town square after school, a sound lighter than the cold could ever be. Casey lived quietly. But the town lived differently now. Kindness, once loosed into the world, had made its way home. And every morning, as the snow fell softly against the glass, Casey remembered the simple truth that had carried her through it all. Kindness without question is enough. Always enough.